Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is two gentlemen, Eddie and Winston. At the time of this recording, the day that you hear this episode, the day that it is released, it is Father's Day. So on behalf of the reigning father of the year, myself, I would like to wish a happy Father's Day to all of the fathers out there, both near and far, past and present, and those who are father figures in the lives of many others. Happy Father's Day. I hope you have a great day. I hope you get the big piece of chicken today. I don't really know what else to say because fathers don't really get the same shine that mothers do on Mother's Day, but that's another story for another day. But I do enjoy Father's Day. I enjoy immensely being a father. As many of you know, or maybe you don't know, I'm a father of four. My wife and I have 4 children. Our sons, Dion, age 25 at the time of this recording, Cameron, age 22, Brandon, age 18, and our daughter Skylar, who is 13, all at the time of this recording. So happy Father's Day to me, I guess. I don't know what the day is and what's in store for today, but we'll see. Nonetheless, I always enjoy Father's Day. But on this episode, I want to talk about 2 specific fathers that I'm 99% sure that none of you have ever heard of. A guy by the name of Eddie and a guy by the name of Winston. First, let me talk about Eddie. Eddie was a guy who grew up in the dirty South, and I mean the dirtiest of dirty South. Came up during the Jim Crow era. Surprisingly, Eddie was an only child, which is kind of rare back then. Living through the Depression. His parents he was the only child. And he was a guy that, didn't really, what can I say? He was a guy who didn't really have, obviously, the advantages and the opportunities that others would have in their lifetime. And he's a guy that, I'll be honest, I've heard great stories about him, but I don't really know him or didn't know him that well. Unfortunately, Eddie passed when I was a year old, so I didn't know him. But from everything that I've heard about him and the pictures I've seen of him, he was a really cool guy. And cool is the operative word because he was definitely cool. I saw pictures of him, all of them in black and white. Eddie was a very, very sharp dressed man. He could drive a car very well. And he was a guy, in spite of being the only child, he would meet a woman named Gladys, and he and Gladys would have 6 children of their own, 3 boys, 3 girls. But Eddie was a guy who was a hard worker, very well respected in his neighborhood, very well respected by his peers. Eddie, in the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s, worked on the railroads. And so back in the day in the South, if you worked on the railroads, that was one of those good jobs. And you didn't necessarily have to be black or white in the Jim Crow South to succeed and make, some quite a bit of good money doing that. I'm not really sure how much he made, but he made good money. And so, from all accounts, Eddie was a guy who made good money. And again, he was a husband and a father of 6. From the stories that I've heard about Eddie is that, like, he was very much loved by his children. He was a man of no nonsense, but his children, definitely looked up to him and definitely respected the hell out of him. And Eddie, from what I understand, was, kind of guy that everybody liked. And Eddie, he was a guy who dealt with the times, I guess, the best way that he could. In that time frame, you had a couple of things that you could do, and one of the things that a lot of men like Eddie did was, when the times got rough, or even when the times didn't get rough, there was no therapist for him to sit down and talk to. So, Eddie grabbed the bottle, and he grabbed it quite often. And so Eddie probably dealt with whatever stress, strain that he was dealing with, or pressure, or just life in general. He probably dealt with it by turning to alcohol and subsequently, developing a drinking problem and becoming an alcoholic. And I remember hearing this story, and the story was quite vivid and very picturesque, and I'm going to try to tell the story as best I can. But as the story goes, it was a Friday, right? And Eddie had gotten paid from the railroad, and I don't know, I guess he worked the second shift or third shift or whatever like that, but he got off at noon. So Eddie got off. And so this particular day, Eddie didn't have his car with him. So he got off, and Eddie, raised his kids, and where he was married, it was in the state of South Carolina, in a city called Florence. And so Eddie, when he got off work, he had his paycheck and he was walking home. And as the story goes, Eddie was walking home. Well, a funny thing happened when he was walking home. When he was walking home, he had to walk through this section in Florence called the Block. Now, the Block isn't any different from any other place back in those times that you would see in any major city. And Florence is not a major city. But it was the black area of the town where black people could go and hang out. There were pool halls. There was bars. I'm sure there might have been some place where you could probably, dip off into and catch a little sniff if you wanted to sniff something. Or if you wanted to pay for a little something with a woman, you could probably pay for a little something with a woman. But you had to, all of this stuff was in the Block. And the Block was only maybe 2 or 3 blocks of this area in Florence. And so he had to walk through the Block. So imagine him coming home on a Friday afternoon, pocket full of money, feeling good. Okay, let me stop at this bar. And so Eddie stops at the bar, and he has a couple with the guys. Then he goes across the street to the pool hall, shoots pool for a couple of hours, starts talking trash, and now probably some money's exchanged because now they're gambling on the pool. And, this goes on for a couple of hours, I would assume. And by the time Eddie leaves, he stumbles home. He gets home about 7 or 8 o'clock, and he just had a full paycheck when he left work at 12 o'clock. But by the time he gets home, he has nothing. Nothing. All of the money gone. And so Eddie, from what I could tell, or at least from what I was told, or as the story goes, made this a habit. And so subsequently, it put a strain on him. It put a strain on his family. It put a strain on his marriage, I would assume. And Gladys wasn't happy. She wasn't happy at all. So Gladys decides, I can't take this. I'm sure after many arguments, many fights, not physically, but verbal fights, she probably had enough. So Gladys said, you know what, I'm gonna move. I'm not divorcing you, but I'm leaving here and I'm going to New Jersey so I can find work because I can't find work here in the South. And that wasn't odd or strange for people to leave the South to go up north because it's the one that's less hassle. Not to say that black people were treated fairly or more fair, but you didn't have to deal with the Jim Crow South. And so she left. And what was interesting was, Eddie's alcoholism became a thing and, ultimately took his life. I don't know necessarily if alcohol killed him, but he didn't kill himself, but I don't know if alcohol killed him, but I'm pretty sure it contributed to his demise in 1973. Meanwhile, as Gladys moves to Newark, New Jersey, the other guy in this story, Winston, is living in New Jersey as well, Newark to be exact. Now, interesting thing about Winston was that he too was married. 5 kids. Unlike Eddie, he had 5 kids. He had 3 girls and 2 boys. And so Winston was a guy who seemed to be kind of like Eddie, life of the party. People liked him. He had a home. He had, again, kids that, looked up to him and loved him and, she would share stories about him and they respected him. And he was very well respected in his community. But much like Eddie, Winston, drank. And he just couldn't cope with, or I don't know if he couldn't cope. Maybe he didn't try well enough to cope. But he couldn't go sit on someone's couch and tell his stories about, what he was going through or what have you. While he didn't have to deal with as much racism as Eddie did in the South, he still had to deal with a lot. And again, there was no reason for him to, dive into alcoholism, but he did. And subsequently, Winston, much like Eddie, found himself in a position where his marriage was in jeopardy. Well, unlike Gladys, who left Eddie but didn't leave him, she left him physically in South Carolina to move to New Jersey. Winston's wife, Opal, who was from Ohio originally, did not go about it the same way. She divorced him, which in 1962 didn't really happen. You didn't see a lot of women divorcing a man in 1960. And I'm throwing a number out there because I'm not exactly sure what year Opal left Winston. But what was interesting was, Winston can honestly say that his behavior and his, addiction cost him his marriage, and subsequently it also cost Winston his relationships with his kids. Now, I don't necessarily know that Eddie had any issues with his kids as far as like, a fallout between them as a result of his alcoholism. Winston did. And so what made Winston's story interesting is that, he had to move on because Opal had moved on. And Winston would eventually still, chase the bottle and, ultimately found himself chasing women, and to the point where he chased a woman all the way across the other side of the world to Los Angeles, California. Now, unlike Eddie, I personally never met Winston. Didn't know him at all. And what was interesting was I mentioned Winston and his children. Well, Winston's son in particular, Fred, they didn't have a good relationship. Didn't have a good relationship at all. To the point where, Fred just really didn't talk that much about Winston. And it was interesting because I think the alcohol really drove a wedge between them, and he didn't like, who Winston was when he was drinking. While he was never physically violent or anything like that, he just didn't like seeing his father, drunk or hungover or anything like that. And the stories about Winston are very sketchy and few and far between, I'll be honest. I don't really know that much, but I could tell you about the experiences. And the reason why I can is because if you haven't figured this out by now, Eddie and Winston have something in common. Eddie and Winston are my maternal and paternal grandfathers. Two men who are responsible for me being on this earth because they made kids who made me. But that being said, I didn't know him. I feel like I know Eddie a little bit more than I know Winston. In fact, I don't know that much about Winston at all. And what's weird is that Eddie passed away when I was a year old. Winston passed away when I was in college in, I think, 1993 or 94. I can't remember the year. But what was interesting was I talked to Winston twice on the phone. And it scared the hell out of me because Winston, when I did talk to him on the phone, I remember I talked to him, I was probably about 8 or 9. He had called my dad and they were talking on the phone because they had gone some time without talking to each other. They didn't talk much. And he had done, I think my dad explained to me, like he was working in some plant or something like that. And he had been drinking or something like that. And basically it messed up his throat. And so between the dust from the plant and some infection that he got in his throat, he ended up losing his larynx. So when he spoke with a voice box, not the voice box like Roger Troutman from the band Zapp. But it sounded like this right here when you talk on the phone. And so when he talked to me, he said, "Hey, Kyle." I know that's terrible, but that's how he sounded. And so he sounded like a machine when I was talking to him, and it freaked me out. And I was probably, like I said, probably about 8 or 9 years old. And our conversation was quick because that scared the hell out of me. And I think I talked to him again maybe once when I was in high school. But again, I didn't know him. I knew of him. I know that he and my dad didn't have a good relationship. My dad was respectful, but he just, what I'm telling you on this podcast is about as much as I know about the man. So I don't have the relationships or the stories that many of you probably have with your grandfathers. But yet I am here because of them. Also, what was interesting was I'll never forget, and I tell the story all the time, and it's still weird when I tell the story, but I distinctly remember when Winston passed. I was at South Carolina State University playing football. Like I said, I think it might have been 93 or 94. And I just remember my dad came to a game. We had a game against Bethune-Cookman. And I remember my dad saying, he's like, "Hey," we were talking after the game. He said, "Hey, I got some bad news. Your grandfather passed." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And it was a brief silence. And he was like, "You want to go get something to eat?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Are you okay?" He was like, "Yeah, I'm cool." And I was like, are you sure? Because I mean, like, he said it as if like it was almost like the scenario if somebody said, hey, you remember Tony Brown from 155th Street? And you're like, yeah, I remember Tony Brown from 155th Street. Yeah, but Tony Brown got shot and killed. Oh, damn. Rest in peace. Hey, so we going to play ball today? It was just like that. I mean, like, he moved on from the subject so fast. And I was just like, this is your guy. This is your pops. And he's gone. And you're not gonna cry. You're not gonna, I mean, but their relationship had been sour for years. And he, from what I could tell, he did what he could to make it as best he could. But he was respectful, but he just didn't see eye to eye with him and hadn't seen eye to eye with him since he was a teen and since since his parents split. I get it, but it was still difficult because, when I think about it, I just didn't have those relationships. And I didn't have those relationships because these men weren't around. Well, Eddie wasn't around, but, Winston was around, but he was in LA. And even when even when I visited LA in 1987 for the first time, when I went out for the Super Bowl and for the Giants versus Denver Broncos Super Bowl 25, I was in LA. And my dad didn't even say, hey, well, you're out there. Let me make sure you go see let me make sure that your grandfather sees you. I didn't see him. I didn't know. I knew he was in LA, but I couldn't tell you where I literally could have bumped into that guy and been like, yo, you look familiar. And it was no hard feelings because for me, it's hard for me to have hard feelings or be angry or have angst towards someone who I don't know. And I really didn't know him. We shared obviously the same last name because he had my dad and my dad had me. And, I didn't dislike him or anything like that. I loved him because he's my grandfather, but I just didn't know him. And I'll be honest, what I've told you about him on this podcast is about as much as I know. I mean, I'm sure I could ask my dad more questions, but it's like it's whatever. But I will say, and where I want to bring all of this together is the reason why my dad is the dad that he is because he didn't have a relationship with his dad. And he told himself that if he ever had children, he was going to be 10 times as good a dad as the dad that he had. And that's what he's been for me, my brother, and my sister. And so subsequently, he's been a great grandfather to my kids and my brother's kids and my sister's kids. And my stepbrother. Can't forget my stepbrother. He's been a great dad to my stepbrother too. But yeah, I mean, like, so I have to thank Winston because if he didn't do anything else, he showed my dad what he shouldn't be. And subsequently, because Winston and Eddie drank as much as they did, maybe that's why I didn't have my first drink until I was 26 years old. And I mean, even now, I mean, I mentioned it before in the podcast, like I'm the most social of social drinkers. Like I don't even drink like that. And I even now to this day at the time of this recording, I can't tell you the last time I had a drink. Like, it's been that long. It's been quite a few months. Like I'll go months without drinking. And I think at some point I'm probably going to get back to the point where I stop drinking altogether because it's not. There's never been a strong desire to drink. It's just, it's cool if I feel like it, but if I don't feel like it, I don't feel like it. It's not. I've never been the guy like come home or let me have a beer, because I've had a hard day at work. I've never been that. And my dad said, alcoholism runs in our family. I don't necessarily know if that's true, but I mean, I had 2 alcoholic grandfathers. Could it be possible? Or could I be preconditioned to it? Possibly, but that's not why I didn't drink. I just didn't see anything in it. But I will say this much. Winston definitely helped him be a better father. And I definitely think that Eddie passed on his work ethic to my mom and subsequently passed it on to me. So while I don't have any memories, while I don't have, the memories or the experiences of them watching me play football or watching me play baseball or coming to my high school graduation or coming to my college graduation or coming to my wedding, while I don't have any of those things, I am thankful that, the traits that they did pass on to their children, more specifically my parents, got passed to me. And subsequently, I hope that I pass those traits and characteristics on to my children. I think I have so far, but we'll see. Nonetheless, I want to say Happy Father's Day to Eddie and Winston. Nobody else is going to tell them Happy Father's Day, but I want to, use this platform to tell them Happy Father's Day because, in many ways, they have provided a blueprint of what to do or maybe what not to do as parents. And more importantly than anything else, they gave the seeds of life to the people who gave the seeds of life to me. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for Eddie's work ethic. I'm thankful for how Eddie loved on his kids. I'm thankful for how Winston, pushed my dad to be better than he was. And my dad always told me, and he tells me this all the time. And he said the first thing that he was told when he became a father, that there's three things that you have to give your child. You have to give them love, you have to give them discipline, and you have to give them an example to follow. Now, he said his dad had no problem giving them love. He definitely didn't have any problem giving them discipline. But the example to follow, he could never be. And that's something that my dad has passed on to me. And prayerfully, I hope that that's something I'm passing on to my kids. And for all you fathers out there, I hope that you're doing that as well. And if you're not, think about Winston, think about Eddie, and think about what you shouldn't want to be. But again, no matter what they did wrong, they were still the men who cared for and provided for their families. And in that, I salute them. I love them. I carry their spirit. I carry their blood. One of the reasons why I do this podcast is because if these mediums stay around long after we're gone, somebody will be able to press play and understand how their grandfather felt in 2025, or how their great-grandfather felt in 2025, or how their great-great-grandfather felt in 2025. I would love to be able to press a button and hear Eddie's voice. I would love to press a button and hear how Winston sounded before he lost his larynx or whatever. But ultimately, again, by society standards, they may have fallen short, but in my eyes, they weren't perfect, but they were great men. And I'm thankful for them because without them, there would be no me. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday and every Sunday at midnight. If you're on YouTube, thank you for watching. We appreciate it. Subscribe there. Make sure that you share the podcast with all of your friends. Also, we have a new baby. It's called the Rap Soul Podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast as well. It is the best music podcast that you've never heard. We talk about hip hop, rap, soul, and R&B, music and artists, conversations that deal with all of that. I tell people it is the best music podcast that you've never heard, so make sure that you check it out. And lastly, if you want to support this podcast financially, hit us up on Cash App, $TWELVEKYLE. Also, we have merch. If you would like a 12 Kyle podcast t-shirt, hoodie, or coffee mug, click the link in the description box that says merch, and there you can find what we have. We got it for the low. Again, This has been the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Again, salute to all the fathers out there. Happy Father's Day. Winston, Eddie, thank you. I love you. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000. Cheers.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.